Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. Hi, Strangeness, Volume 4, Story Number 1. My paternal grandfather passed away in late July 1963, and thus I had my first experience with death. Just a few months later, President Kennedy was assassinated. A week after the president was killed, we were staying with relatives in their little house on Swope Avenue in Colorado Springs when I had my first spirit encounter, launching my lifelong interest in all things metaphysical. I was thinking about the passing of both men one evening and was wondering if we really survived death in some aspect. Mind you, I was only 10 years old at the time. We went to church that evening, and interestingly enough, the pastor spoke about the very things running through my mind. That night, I woke with a start. My cousin's bedroom was pitch black, as always. I was lying in the top bunk, peering into the darkness, trying to see what I could. I was certain something unusual was about to occur. Just as that thought had passed, I saw the image of my grandfather walk into the room. I was absolutely terrified, and before I could shut my eyes, he asked, "Rick, are you awake?" I thought my heart was about to pound right out of my chest. I kept my eyes tightly closed for a period of time, and when I opened them once again, I saw Grandpa stand up, as though he'd been checking on my brother in the lower bunk, and walk from the room. I'd always wondered why my aunt always kept the bed about a foot from the wall. At that moment, I was certain it was so a skinny 10-year-old could slip out of the top bunk and crawl into the lower one, which is exactly what I did. I lay next to my brother the remainder of the night. Looking back, I'm amazed I was able to sleep. I bounded out of bed the next morning when I heard the adults in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Naturally, I couldn't get the story out quick enough, and in some ways I wish I hadn't, since the adults didn't take to this very well. I was a bit flabbergasted that my relatives, who were staunch Southern Baptists, could tell me that I was dreaming or lying. All this after I'd heard their own pastor tell much differently just the night before. My father became upset with me, asking how I could possibly be frightened of my own grandfather, who'd never hurt me while he was alive. I learned one of my first lessons about metaphysical experiences that morning. Keep your mouth shut until you know exactly that the persons you wish to tell are sympathetic. Next story. It was the Saturday evening before Easter 1997, a warm spring evening. The sun had set about a half hour earlier when I set out driving my two younger brothers just a few blocks over to drop them off at some video games they had borrowed from a friend. Our suburban neighborhood was nestled among a softly rolling wooded area, partially surrounding a small formerly country cemetery dating to the early 20th century. It wasn't a particularly frightening looking place, though. Driving past at night always sent a chill up my spine as my headlights reflected off the gravestones as I would round the corner and come up over the hill. Their friend's house was along the backside of the cemetery, separated by a narrow, overgrown tree line. On this evening, I had just turned out of their friend's driveway and headed toward home. I had to slam on the brakes suddenly to avoid hitting a cat that darted out in front of me, heading from a nearby yard toward the tree line and the cemetery beyond. As our eyes instinctively followed the cat to its destination across the road, we saw a strange sight just along the edge of the glow of our headlights. There, just inside the cemetery, we could make out a seemingly solid, yet eerily unreal figure. It appeared to be the back of a woman we were looking at, who appeared to be dressed in white from head to toe, with a gently flowing shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a white hat over her silver hair. She seemed to be floating just above the ground. In front of her was what appeared to be a small cart, like an old-fashioned baby carriage. From the back she looked to be gazing on a gravestone in front of her, perhaps mourning the loss of a loved one during this time of Easter celebration in spring. The cat approached her and stood beside her, not quite touching her semi-transparent legs, and looked back at us. While the cat looked to be alive, its graveyard companion did not. It seemed like an eternity that we sat there. But as my eyes met those of my brother next to me in the front seat, and my youngest brother in the back called my name in a quivering voice, I knew I wasn't alone in seeing the woman in the cemetery. I also was sure that they were as certain as I was that she wasn't flesh and blood, at least not anymore. Without a conscious effort, I floored the gas pedal and sped down the street toward home, a cold sweat forming on my forehead and goosebumps covering me from head to toe. When we got home, we were all visibly shaken, and my mom asked if everything was okay. We explained to her what we saw, and I could tell she was skeptical, but like a good mother, she tried to soothe our fears and gave a logical explanation. But she never questioned why I would not drive down that road after dark from then on, and my brothers were always sure to come home from that friend's house long before the sun set. Next story. I was deployed with the 1st Armored Division for the U.S. Army in December of 1995. I was a scout in a scout unit that was required to perform route reconnaissance for the movement of the 1st Armored Division into the former republics of Yugoslavia. During the time our troop spent in Bosnia in a place coined by the military as the Posavina Corridor, our troop had experienced unexplainable happenings. Our troop was encamped in a cattle pasture outside of a town that had been ethnically cleansed. The place was in the country, and to access the location you had to have some sort of tracked vehicle to navigate the dirt roads in the area. Most of the places in Posavina Corridor were abandoned due to fighting between Bosnians, Croats, and Serbs. Between January and February of 1996, I do not remember getting too much sleep as we were on patrol most of the time, or nailing down and negotiating the withdrawal and cleanup of weapons and landmines from an area occupied by one of the various factions declaring turf. If snow and ice were not on the ground, it was so muddy that traveling by foot was a real hassle. Near our encampment, one of the sections had to be called back due to activity in the area. The section was relaying information up to command of a possible soldier/sniper in their area. The snow on the ground was loose and tracks in the ground were present, proving that someone was running around scouting our encampment from the empty town. The section saw the soldier inside one of the houses and proceeded to subdue him. With a fresh cover of snow on the ground, there was only one set of boot prints into the house, with a section of 3 Bradley fighting vehicles on the outside of the house on the road. And soldiers following the trail of boot prints, there was nowhere for this soldier to go. When the dismounted soldiers arrived in the room in the house where the soldier was, he was nowhere to be found. His tracks ended at the window, and there were no places to hide. This was one of the many things we would encounter in Bosnia. This was just one of the things that happened to get reported up higher, which was not commented on other than that the section was told to carry on and continue under patrol. A few weeks later, I was on guard duty on the front gate of our encampment with another soldier from our tanker platoon. We had a fire barrel to keep us dry while the snow had melted, leaving mud everywhere. Our 4-hour shift was around its halfway point at 3 in the morning. Johnson, not his actual name, and I had watched a Bosnian soldier trod through the mud up to the gate of the encampment. We could hear him coming up to the gate, and there was enough light to make out the uniform of the soldier. While I was covered by Johnson, I walked to the gate to get a closer look at the soldier. He got to the gate, looked like he had been working in the same clothes for at least a month. When I met the Bosnian soldier at the front gate, he just seemed interested in having a cigarette. I gave him one of mine and lit it up for him. I leaned over the concertina wire to light the cigarette in his mouth while he shielded the wind from putting out my lighter. He waved and turned to leave, and so I turned around to leave the gate, and Johnson freaked. He said, "Where the did he go?" I turned around, and the soldier had disappeared, cigarette and all. Johnson and I decided not to report the activity to our guard commander. There are a lot more things that occurred, but the ghost things never seemed to bother me. It was the things that people did or had done to one another that gave me chills. Next story. Our family had outgrown our small 3-bedroom rambler home, considering that there were 5 of us kids and our parents. My parents found a new split-level style home with 4 bedrooms and a full-size partially finished basement. My brother and I shared a large bedroom in the basement. I was the oldest and about age 15, just starting high school. We had been in the house about a year when strange things began happening. I was always the first one home from school, and I would go down to my room to do my homework as my father had put a work desk in an alcove for me. I remember I turned on the overhead light switch and was doing my homework. A few minutes later, the light went off. I walked around the corner, and it was in the off position. I turned it on, and a few moments later, it went off again. I knew I was the only one home, so I told my dad that evening that something was wrong with the light switch and explained what had happened. He examined the switch and said it was working just fine. One evening, a month or so later, I decided to take a bath rather than a shower in the main bathroom upstairs. I was sitting in the tub when suddenly someone started rapping on the bottom of the tub. I could feel the vibration, so I knew it was not my imagination. This kept up for a few minutes, then stopped. It was after this that life got interesting for all of us. One night my brother and I woke up at the same time around 12:30. We both saw a figure of a tall man standing by the bedroom door, which was closed. The figure was dark and no features were visible, just an outline, colored in. He seemed to float rather than walk toward us, passed at the foot of our beds, and just disappeared through the door into the furnace room in our bedroom. Years later, at a family gathering, I found out, talking to my brother and three sisters, that even more had been going on that I hadn't been aware of since I had gone into the service right out of high school in 1965. One of my sisters came home from school, unlocked the front door, and walked into the house. She saw a tennis ball suddenly fly down the hall toward her and hit the wall just above her. Another time, two of my sisters were sitting on a bed in their room when items on the top shelf in their closet suddenly started being tossed out around the room. My dad asked my brother to stack up boxes in the storage room to neaten it up, which he did. Dad went down a bit later and asked him why he hadn't done it. He had, but they had been neatly unstacked. After several tries, he just gave up. My brother had gone out with friends one night, and they dropped him off at the house. He went out onto the balcony to wave goodbye. The next day, they asked who the old man was standing next to him. Of course, there had been no one there. I was never so glad to leave a house in my life. To this day, I wonder if strange things are still happening in that place. Next story. I had a large gray cat that was a stray for many, many years. Kitty was with me through some difficult times. In her previous life as a stray, she had been abused, and as a result of this, neither of her front legs were straight. She had a hard time jumping and ran in a very unique manner. After she died, I found out that I was pregnant with my son, who is now 7. The longer my pregnancy went on, the more complications I seemed to develop. One night when my husband and I were in bed, I felt her jump on the foot of our bed. Kitty always landed very heavy due to the old injury on her front legs. I actually felt her lying against my legs, like she always did before she died. A few days later, my husband mentioned to me that he thought he felt her jump on the bed one night. We both felt her jump on the bed. After my son came home from the hospital, he slept in a bassinet in our bedroom. Many nights I would go in there to check on him and would see Kitty lying on the floor underneath his bed. A few times there were even an imprint of her body on our bed, like she was standing guard over the baby to make sure that he was safe. When my son was about a year old, we all moved into the house I grew up in. Many, many times all of us would catch a glimpse of Kitty running up the stairs in her unique kitty way. As my son learned to talk, he described playing with 4 cats, 3 that could run and play, and 1 that couldn't. We had gotten 3 cats from my mom and dad when we moved, not 4. Kitty stayed with us until both of her kittens died of old age. Next story. I really can't prove that my story is true, but all I can do is to tell you what I went through. It's up to you to believe me. The year was 1997. I was about the age of 12. My parents were separated, and I decided that I wanted to stay with my mother. On other occasions, I would visit my father. My mother and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens. Sometimes late at night, I would go down to the basement to do my laundry. Nothing weird ever happened when I went down there. It was just very quiet. I really never planned to do my laundry that late, but it always ended up that way. Around the late hours, nobody does their laundry. It seemed like I was the only one there. Everybody in the apartment building had their own gates. The weird thing about me is that I was always scared to go down to the basement so late, but then I would still continue to go late. My mother did not know I did my laundry that late. If she did, she would definitely have told me to do it earlier in the day. One late night during the month of September 1997, around 11 p.m., I decided to do my laundry. I put my first load of whites in the washer. During that time, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, but I didn't hear the door open that led to the stairs. Usually, I do because it makes a loud creaking sound. I started to get really nervous and hot. Then I heard footsteps coming toward the hallway leading toward the gates. I stopped what I was doing to look at the end of the hallway to see if I saw anyone. All I saw was a shadow just standing there. It looked like a naked man just staring at me. He wasn't even moving, but I kept hearing footsteps. I just stood there in a still position, not moving, just looking at the shadow and listening to the footsteps. I hurried to close the gate. Then I went back to see if I still saw the shadow. It was still there, just doing nothing. I was so scared to even scream or say a word. I thought I was going crazy, but I knew I wasn't. I just cried and sat on the floor, rocking back and forth with my eyes closed. I was praying it would just go away. Keep in mind that I still heard the footsteps getting closer to the gate. After 20 minutes, I didn't hear the footsteps, and I stood up slowly to see if the shadow was there, and thank God it wasn't. Then I heard the footsteps again. I sat back down and took a deep breath. All kinds of thoughts were running through my head of what should I do. I decided I would leave my clothes downstairs, close the gate, and run as fast as I could without stopping or looking back. That's exactly what I did. When I finally got inside my apartment, I locked my door and left all the lights on in the apartment and got in bed. I did not go to sleep right away. I just watched some TV. I eventually fell asleep and figured when I woke up in the morning I would tell my mom everything. Until this day, I don't know why that happened to me or what was happening. I hope never to have that experience again. Ever since that night, I never did my laundry late anymore. My mother would come downstairs with me to do my laundry until I got old enough to go by myself. Next story. When I was a little girl, about 7 years old, my family and I lived in a colonial-style home in Brisbane. I was always a solitary child, and my parents were happy to have me play with an imaginary friend. I remembered her as Sarah. I remember playing with dolls, playing hide and seek, and climbing trees. She always wore a pretty yellow dress and sunbonnet. I used to tell her to come in shorts. We lived in that house for about 8 months. When we left, Sarah did not come as well, and I was much older. I was talking to my parents about friends and old homes. I mentioned Sarah, my childhood imaginary friend. My mother said she never liked that house. As a chef, she said she never felt at home in the kitchen. She always felt it was someone else's. She also asked me if I remembered the lady and little girl ghost. I said, "What ghost?" Mom said, "The one every couple of nights that would stand over you and just look at you when I was sleeping." She said that they used to almost look as if they were kissing me goodnight. She said she never felt fear from them. They honestly gave her a feeling of well-wishers. In the old-style homes, you have a main room off the side, and the door leads to a hallway with another room that has 2 doors and more hallways. That was my room. So from her bed, she could see the people in my room. I asked her what they wore. Mom said the lady wore a bluish dress, and the little girl a yellow dress and sunbonnet. I don't know any history about the house or the people, but I remember clear as day playing with Sarah and the fun we had. If she was anything other than imaginary, I hope that I made some of her time there happy too. Next story. During the summer of 1992, I worked as a security officer at a famous, now replaced casino/hotel on the Las Vegas Strip. My duties included outside patrol of the grounds as well as inside work in the casino. I worked a graveyard shift and had just completed a walkthrough of one of the outer guest buildings. Upon exiting the building, I stopped for a moment to light a cigarette. I started to take a look around, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something strange. Over the rear entrance of the casino, I saw something that looked like a large bundle of plastic wrap floating in the air about 10 to 15 feet above the roof line of the building. It was moving slowly, gaining altitude as it moved east away from the casino and the strip. Of course, you think of every possible explanation to rationalize something you have seen. While watching the undulating, floating whatever, another officer on my shift approached me to see what I was looking at. Before I could say a word, he said, "Oh my God, what is that?" I related to him that I had been watching it moving around for about 5 minutes before he came to the area. We stood and watched for about another 5 minutes when all of a sudden the whatever made one more quick move toward the rear of the property and was gone. I should mention that this was a warm summer night with little or no breeze that could have assisted the object on its maneuvers. We never spoke of the incident to anyone else or each other again. If we had, this would have brought the suspicions of our supervisors and very possibly a substance test down on us. This is the only time I've ever told the story to anyone other than my wife, from whom I got the "sure you did, honey" look. Next story. My encounter is only told to me, but by two different people whom never met but both lived in the same house. A large apartment house on New York Street in Long Beach, California. I've spent many attempts to find out more, but no luck. The story was told to me by a young sailor at that time, about the age of 20. He and his girlfriend lived in his apartment in a weird house on New York Street, a U-shaped house with a nice courtyard, a large trash burner out back. He experienced voices when no one was around, crying women, angry voices, all of which rose to where they could almost hear what they were saying, and then they would fade away. They assumed that it was other renters in the building. Then came footsteps and the doors opening and water turning on for no reason at all. Or the beer cans freshly thrown away jumping out of the trash and rolling back to you. Spooked, yes, but they stayed until he said that he felt a hand reach under his pillow. He hollered for light and was holding thin air. This may have been to make the story better, but it had its effect. I returned to my ship the next day and recounted the story to my shipmates, only to have my first-class petty officer tell me the location of the house before I had finished. This man was in his 40s and had in no way ever met the man I had spoken to the night before. He recounted the same story, but had looked into it more. He said his dog would stare and watch passing objects when nothing was there. Sometimes bark, other times whimper and hide. Same voices, same weeping women. He lived there 2 years and found it interesting but unnerving at times. The story for him was that the house belonged to a doctor in the 20s and 30s who did illegal operations on anyone with money or exchange for favors until he was caught. Abortions and gunshots were the common. Those who did not survive ended up in the large burner out back. According to my friend, it was a lot. I never made it back to Long Beach to find out more, but always had wanted to. Also, I wanted to find out about the lady in white who haunted the San Pedro beach in search of her lost son, who went to sea and never returned. A note on this was that the first sailor who told me the story said he had seen her twice. I never saw him again after that. Next story. I used to live in Niagara for 16 years. In this time, I'd experienced several unexplained happenings. I owned a house on Ventura Drive in St. Catharines. Shortly after I moved in, things began to happen. The lights, gas stove, stereo, TV, wood-burning stove, and washing machine used to come on by themselves. Toilets would flush on their own, and large plants hanging from the ceiling would begin moving and turning. Closet doors were opening and closing, doors were slamming. We heard banging on the walls in the dining room, and the list goes on. Whenever there was activity, there was a very strong scent from the wood-burning stove. It smelled of ashes. My scariest experience in this house happened after I'd been out one evening. It began to rain, and by the time I'd gotten home, there was a severe thunder and lightning storm, and the power and phones were out in the house. I entered the house and went upstairs into the kitchen and grabbed a candle above the stove. I lit the candle, and upon turning around toward the hallway, a large, dark figure ran out in front of me. I was so scared I huddled up on the sofa, rocking back and forth until the power came back on. It was then I saw what looked like human claw marks in the carpet at the top of the stairs in front of the kitchen. Several weeks later, I started to research the history of the house. At the public library, I found out the house was built 16 years earlier and none of the previous owners had died in the home. Many of my friends and family also saw and heard some of these experiences. As to what made those marks, maybe it wasn't someone, it was something. Next story. From the time I built this house in 1999, some strange things began to happen. But most of it was harmless and not much notice was taken of these things at first. The first encounter was about 3 months after I'd finished building the house. I just dozed off to sleep when I was woken by a stereo playing. I went and turned it off and thought nothing of it. A few weeks later, I was asleep and was woken around 3 a.m. by the sound of footsteps and running outside my hallway. I could hear voices saying, "Shh, we'll wake him." Like anyone else would, I got up to see who it was but found not a trace of anyone. I put it down to a dream. The only problem was I kept hearing them come and go month after month. They didn't frighten me because I sensed the voices were of young children playing, and the odd occasion the stereo would come on again, which was around the same time, 3 a.m. Got to the point where I thought my stereo was faulty and I pulled the plug from the wall. But what was soon to happen was the TV started to switch on. Not at any channel, just a blank channel. I guessed at that point that it did make me wonder what was going on, but like I said, I felt I was not threatened in any way. After this all seemed to quiet down. The little voices would come and go, and it could be months between each visit. Either that, or I had gotten used to the voices and slept peacefully. I have a company in the USA which I traveled to a lot, and I didn't always live in my house in Australia. On one visit back to Australia, I was sleeping and heard the sound of running water. It sounded real, so I thought a tap was left on, or a pipe had burst. I got up to investigate. What I did find was that I had a collection of port wine which was always laid down, but to my astonishment there was port all over the tiled floor, and what I found amazing was the bottle had the lead seal over it. But the cork had been pushed into the bottle, yet no one was home except for myself. I have a dog which was 8 months old, and he would start growling and backing up, or go right off barking in fright. And yet he could be in any room, and he doesn't do it, even when no one's there. It takes me a few minutes of patting him to calm him down, and he sensed stuff I couldn't see or sense. Lately, I feel a sense of unease, and on 4 occasions, I've had this door swing seated on my patio, and with no wind around it, it will suddenly start to swing and sometimes swing quite fast. When this starts to happen, I take the dog and go inside. I don't know what's going on here, but it's starting to bother me because I feel it's no longer little kids and something much more sinister is starting to evolve. All I know is I'm beginning to dislike living here. Next story. I was a deputy sheriff for 10 years and used to work off duty at the Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. I mostly worked late at night to keep trespassers out, etc. One night, about 2 in the morning, I went out with other officers and was standing beside the crypt of President James Monroe. I stated the observation. He must have been a short son of a you-know-what. Then out of nowhere, a swarm of insects attacked us. It was so bad that they filled the inside of my van, covering the whole front window. Before I said that, there was not a bug to be heard or seen. Next, the pyramid dedicated to the dead Confederate soldier. Several of us experienced a severe cold spot next to the monument that you could literally walk in and out of. It was not a draft from the monument because you could stand next to the monument in the cold spot and be warm. One morning, I was there on a weekend to open the front gates. I was in the maintenance shed where the bathroom happens to be. I was very sick and vomiting in the toilet. I heard the door behind me creak open and footsteps. I called out, "Please, leave me alone today, people. I don't feel good." I could also feel the hair on my neck tingling. After I said this, the sensation and sounds disappeared. We left the tape recorder on the tombstones one night and came back. You could hear a voice state, "Jake and Josh." Later investigation revealed tombstones bearing those names next to the tape recorder. Next story. I lived in this house for about 6 months with my husband. This was back in 1980. And our 3 children were there, and I was expecting our 4th child in September. I knew before moving in that a woman had been murdered there recently, but I didn't tell my husband until after we moved in. The first thing that happened while we were there was, as a matter of fact, we were still moving in. We were not staying there overnight. We'd left some pizza and a half case of beer in their fridge, and when we came back the next day, half of it was gone. I knew someone could have come in, but I truly didn't think that that's what happened. Now, the first thing my husband and I noticed was the chalk outline of the body on the closet floor. No matter how many times I cleaned it, by the next day it was back. The bedroom she was murdered in was always very cold, no matter how high the heat was. So shortly after my daughter was born, we moved out of the bedroom and made it a storage room. I would always find the door open and the closet door and light on. She just didn't want to stay in there. Nothing bad ever happened. She just let us know she was there. We would hear footsteps walking upstairs and down the hallway, or sounds coming from the kitchen, cold spots and breezes at different times. Our dog would start growling for no apparent reason. Things would get moved, or the radio might come on by itself. The only one to ever see her was my oldest daughter when she was 11 years old. She said she heard someone walking down the hall and was watching to see who it was when a lady appeared in the doorway. She said she could see through her and that she stood there and smiled at her and then just disappeared. Most of my family and friends would not come to my house, or if they did, they wouldn't stay there long because they felt uncomfortable. I never felt uncomfortable, although I knew she was there. I think she was happy having the kids around as she was the mother of three herself when she was murdered. The house is still there and my kids and I still wonder if she is.